How did my graduation party turn into a hostage situation in under 15 minutes? I was standing by the cake table at 6:43 p.m. when my ex-boyfriend Gavin walked through the door with a gun tucked into his waistband and a smile on his face like he'd been invited. The metallic glint caught the light from the string lights my mom had hung across the backyard, and for a second I thought it was his phone, or maybe a flask because Gavin always drank too much at parties. But then he lifted his shirt slightly to adjust it, and I saw the black handle clearly, saw the way his hand rested on it with practiced familiarity, and my stomach dropped so fast I thought I might throw up right there on my graduation cake. He caught my eye from across the yard and winked, still smiling, and I felt my hands start shaking so badly I had to set down the knife I'd been holding. My best friend Aubrey was standing next to me asking what kind of cake I wanted, chocolate or vanilla, and I couldn't make my mouth form words to answer her because Gavin was walking toward us now, weaving through my family and friends like he belonged there, and I knew with absolute certainty that something terrible was about to happen. I'd been planning this graduation party for 3 months, ever since I'd gotten my acceptance letter from Cornell with a full academic scholarship. My parents had insisted on throwing me a celebration, inviting extended family, neighbors, friends from high school, basically everyone we knew in our small town outside Burlington, Vermont. We'd rented tables and chairs, hired a caterer, strung up decorations all over our backyard. There were probably 60 people there by the time Gavin showed up, all of them laughing and eating and congratulating me on getting into an Ivy League school with a free ride. My mom, Catherine, was a kindergarten teacher who'd worked 2 jobs to help me through high school. My dad, Robert, managed a hardware store and had always told me education was the only way out of a small town with limited opportunities. They were so proud of me that day, both of them glowing as they introduced me to distant relatives who wanted to hear about my plans for college. I was their only child, their miracle baby after years of trying, and this party was as much for them as it was for me. Gavin and I had broken up 2 months earlier, right after prom, when I'd finally had enough of his controlling behavior and constant jealousy. We'd dated for 18 months, and for the first 6 months it had been good. Or at least I'd convinced myself it was good. He was charming and attentive, always texting to check on me, always wanting to spend time together. But slowly that attention turned into surveillance. He needed to know where I was every minute, who I was with, what I was doing. He'd show up unannounced at my house or my job at the library. He'd go through my phone when I wasn't looking, demanding explanations for texts from male classmates about homework. When I got into Cornell, he'd been furious instead of happy, accusing me of planning to leave him, of thinking I was too good for him now. The final straw came when he showed up at my workplace and caused a scene, yelling at a male coworker who'd asked me about a book recommendation. I'd broken up with him the next day, and he'd acted like it was fine, like he understood. Too fine, too understanding. Looking back, I should have known he was planning something. Aubrey saw my face and followed my gaze to where Gavin was approaching. She grabbed my arm and hissed, "What is he doing here? You didn't invite him, right?" I shook my head, unable to speak, watching as Gavin stopped about 10 feet away and pulled out the gun completely, holding it casually at his side where most people couldn't see it yet. But I could see it perfectly. He called my name, loud enough that a few people nearby turned to look and said, "Congratulations on graduating, Mackenzie. I brought you a present." His voice was light, friendly, the same tone he used to use when we first started dating and everything seemed normal. But his eyes were wrong, too bright, too focused, like he was on something or like he'd finally stopped pretending to be sane. My dad started walking over, probably to tell Gavin to leave since he knew we'd broken up. But Gavin raised the gun then, pointing it at my dad's chest and said, "Everyone stay exactly where you are or I start shooting." The backyard went silent in a way that felt unnatural, like someone had hit a mute button on the world. 60 people frozen mid-conversation, mid-bite, mid-laugh, all staring at the gun in Gavin's hand. My dad stopped walking, his hands going up slowly, his face pale. My mom made this small sound, like a whimper, and I saw her clutching the back of a chair for support. Aubrey's nails dug into my arm hard enough to bruise, and I could feel her whole body trembling. Gavin smiled wider and gestured with the gun for everyone to move toward the center of the yard. "Come on, don't be shy. Everyone together where I can see you. Anyone tries to run or call the cops, and Mackenzie's dad gets a bullet. Then her mom, then her best friend, then Mackenzie herself. So let's all be smart about this." His voice was cheerful, conversational, like he was directing people at a normal party instead of holding them hostage. People started moving, slowly, carefully, clustering together near the dessert table. I saw my Aunt Eleanor trying to shield her 2 young kids with her body. I saw my neighbor, Mr. Kowalski, a Vietnam vet in his 70s, assessing Gavin with calculating eyes like he was thinking about rushing him. I saw the caterer, a woman named Denise who I'd met 3 times during planning meetings, fumbling with her phone before Gavin barked at her to drop it. "Phones on the ground, all of them, now." He waved the gun in an arc, and I heard the clatter of devices hitting grass as people complied. My own phone was in my pocket, but I didn't dare reach for it. Gavin's eyes kept coming back to me, tracking my every movement, and I realized with cold clarity that this whole thing was about me, that everyone here was in danger because of whatever delusion he'd constructed about our relationship. Gavin started talking then, pacing back and forth in front of the crowd while keeping the gun trained on us. He talked about how we were supposed to be together forever, how I'd promised to love him, How getting into Cornell was my way of abandoning him for some fancy East Coast life where I'd forget about him. He talked about how my parents had poisoned me against him, how Aubrey was a bad influence, how everyone at this party had conspired to keep us apart. None of it made sense. I'd never promised forever. I'd been 17 when we started dating, and he'd been 19, already out of high school and working at his uncle's auto shop. I'd told him from the beginning that I was going to college, that I had plans for my life. But in Gavin's mind, he'd rewritten our entire relationship into some grand romance that I'd betrayed. I could see my mom crying silently, tears streaming down her face, and my dad's jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. I tried to speak, to reason with him, to tell him he could leave right now and no one would stop him. But Gavin cut me off. "Shut up, Mackenzie. You don't get to talk right now. You've done enough talking. You and your college plans and your scholarship and your whole perfect future that doesn't include me." He turned to address the crowd. "You all think she's so special, right? So smart going to Cornell. Well, I'm smart too. I planned this perfectly. All the exits are covered." He gestured toward the fence line, and I saw with sinking horror that he'd positioned large bags at 3 different points. "Those are filled with gasoline and homemade explosives. I've got the detonator right here." He pulled a small device from his other pocket, something that looked like a garage door opener. "Anyone tries to leave, I press the button and this whole yard goes up in flames." The crowd's fear shifted to terror. Parents pulled their children closer. My Aunt Eleanor was openly sobbing now. Mr. Kowalski's military assessment had changed to resignation, probably understanding that rushing a gunman who claimed to have explosives was suicide. Aubrey whispered, "Oh my God," over and over like a prayer. I looked at the bags Gavin had pointed out, trying to determine if he was bluffing, but they were positioned exactly where he'd said, and they looked bulky enough to contain something. I thought about all the times Gavin had talked about his uncle teaching him about engines and mechanics, about how he'd always been good with his hands, and I realized he probably did know how to make something explosive. My graduation party had become a death trap in less than 15 minutes, and it was entirely my fault for not seeing how unstable Gavin had become. Time moved strangely after that. Gavin made everyone sit down on the grass, and he pulled me aside to stand next to him while he kept the gun pointed at the crowd. He wanted me close, wanted to touch my arm occasionally while he talked, wanted to perform this sick theater of us being together while everyone watched in horror. I stood rigid, trying not to flinch when he touched me, trying not to look at my parents' terrified faces. Gavin rambled about his plan, about how he was going to make me see that we belonged together, about how after today I'd understand that leaving him was impossible. He'd thought this through, he said. He'd been planning it since the day I broke up with him. He'd researched how to make explosives online. He'd bought the gun from some guy he knew. He'd waited for the perfect moment when everyone I cared about would be gathered in one place. My mind raced through options. I could try to run, but he'd shoot someone before I made it 3 steps. I could try to grab the gun, but he was bigger and stronger and expecting resistance. I could try to talk him down, but every word I'd said so far had made him angrier. I was 18 years old, fresh out of high school, and I had no training for hostage negotiation or crisis management. I'd read about situations like this in the news, seen them in movies, but nothing prepared you for the reality of a gun pointed at people you loved and a finger on the trigger belonging to someone who used to kiss you goodnight. I thought about my future at Cornell, about the dorm room I'd already been assigned, about the classes I'd been excited to take. I thought about how my parents had sacrificed so much to help me get there, and I thought about how all of it might end in this backyard because I dated the wrong person. Gavin's phone rang in his pocket, making several people jump. He pulled it out one-handed, keeping the gun steady, and looked at the screen. His expression darkened. "Police," he said. "Someone must have gotten a call out before I took the phones." He looked around at the crowd, his eyes landing on a man near the back I didn't recognize, probably someone's +1. "Was it you?" The man shook his head frantically, but Gavin wasn't convinced. He aimed the gun at the man's leg and fired. The sound was deafening, echoing off the houses nearby. The man screamed and fell, blood spreading across his pants. People scattered slightly, then froze when Gavin shouted, "Nobody move! I said nobody move!" His cheerful demeanor was gone now, replaced by cold fury. "The next person who tries something gets it in the head, not the leg." My ears were ringing from the gunshot. The wounded man was writhing on the ground, his hands pressed to his thigh, blood seeping between his fingers. 2 women near him, probably his wife and sister based on their resemblance, were crying and trying to help him while Gavin warned them not to move too much. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the scent of grilled food from earlier, creating this surreal sensory combination that made me want to vomit. Gavin's phone rang again. This time he answered, putting it on speaker. A calm male voice said, "This is Detective Raymond Cross with the Burlington Police Department. I understand we have a situation at 412 Maple Street. Can you tell me what's going on?" Gavin laughed. Actually laughed and said, "What's going on is I'm having a graduation party with my girlfriend and about 60 of her closest friends and family, and they're all going to stay here until Mackenzie agrees to come back to me and forget about Cornell." Detective Cross's voice remained steady. "Okay, I hear you. Can you tell me your name?" Gavin hesitated, then shrugged. "Gavin Lewis. And before you try any hero stuff, detective, know that I've got explosives planted around this yard. I've got a gun with plenty of ammunition, and I've got nothing to lose, so maybe you should just back off and let me handle my personal business." There was a pause. Then Detective Cross said, "Gavin, I want to help you resolve this peacefully. Is anyone hurt?" Gavin looked at the man he'd shot. "One guy took a bullet to the leg for being stupid. He'll live if you send paramedics in. Otherwise, everyone's fine, for now." Cross asked if he could speak to someone to verify they were okay, and Gavin grabbed my dad, shoving the phone near his face. "Tell him you're fine, Robert." My dad's voice shook when he said, "We're alive. He has a gun and says he has explosives. Please, just do what he wants." The call ended with Detective Cross saying he'd call back in 10 minutes and asking Gavin not to hurt anyone else. Gavin tossed the phone aside and looked at me with this expression of satisfaction, like he'd just proven a point. "See? They're going to let us work this out ourselves. They're not going to storm in here because they know I'm serious." He touched my face, and I forced myself not to recoil. "This can all end peacefully, Mackenzie. Just tell me you'll stay. Tell me you'll turn down Cornell and stay here with me. That's all I want." His voice had gone soft again, pleading, like we were having a normal relationship conversation instead of a hostage negotiation. I looked past him at the crowd, at my mother's tear-stained face, at Aubrey's wide, terrified eyes, at the man bleeding on the grass, and I knew I had to buy time. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, Gavin, we can talk about it. Just please don't hurt anyone else." Detective Cross called back exactly 10 minutes later, and this became the pattern for the next hour. Every 10 minutes, a call. Every call, Gavin would make demands or complaints, and Cross would stay calm, asking about people's welfare, offering food or medical attention for the wounded man. I learned later that Cross was a veteran negotiator with 19 years of experience, specialized training in hostage situations, and a success record that made him the first call for critical incidents. But in the moment, all I knew was his voice was the only thing keeping Gavin from shooting someone else. Cross tried to build rapport, asking Gavin about his interests, his job, his relationship with me. Gavin would engage for a while, talking about how we met at a party, how I'd smiled at him and made him feel special. Then he'd switch to anger, accusing Cross of trying to trick him, of not taking his concerns seriously. The wounded man's name was Thomas Hartley, someone's coworker who I'd never met before today. He'd gone into shock from blood loss, and 2 people with medical training, a nurse named Joyce Bellamy and an EMT named Craig Solomon, had been allowed to tend to him using supplies from a first aid kit someone had in their car. Gavin watched them like a hawk, the gun never wavering, ready to shoot if he thought they were trying something. Joyce kept murmuring reassurances to Thomas, applying pressure to the wound, but I could see the concern in her eyes. He needed a hospital, needed real medical care, but Gavin refused to let him leave. "He can go when Mackenzie agrees to stay with me. Everyone can go. That's the deal." He repeated this to Detective Cross during the next call, and I could hear the frustration creeping into Cross's steady voice. By call 5, the FBI had arrived. Detective Cross introduced a woman named Special Agent Lillian Torres, a crisis negotiator with the FBI's Critical Incident Response Group who'd been brought in from Boston. Her voice was different from Cross's, warmer somehow, more empathetic. She told Gavin she understood he felt betrayed, that breakups were painful, that it made sense he wanted to fix things with me. She asked if she could talk to me directly to understand my perspective. Gavin considered this, then held the phone up to my face. Agent Torres said, "Mackenzie, my name is Lillian. Can you tell me how you're doing?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "I'm okay. We're all okay except Thomas. He needs a doctor." Torres asked if I was hurt, if Gavin had harmed me specifically, and I said no. She asked if I believed Gavin would let everyone go if I agreed to his demands, and I said I didn't know. She told me I was doing great, that help was coming, that I should keep Gavin calm and engaged. The sun started setting around 8:15 p.m., painting the sky orange and pink in this beautiful gradient that felt obscene given the circumstances. Gavin had been holding us hostage for over 90 minutes. People needed to use the bathroom, and Gavin allowed them to go in pairs to the house, always keeping the gun on those who remained. Parents tried to comfort crying children. My Aunt Eleanor's kids, ages 6 and 9, had stopped crying and gone silent, a worse sign according to the child psychologist who later evaluated them. Food sat abandoned on tables, cake melting in the heat, decorations fluttering in the evening breeze. Police had set up a perimeter around the property, and I could see flashing lights through the trees, could hear the distant sound of voices and radio static. A helicopter circled overhead, probably news media, and Gavin looked up at it with satisfaction. "The whole world's going to know our story," he said to me. "They're going to see how much I love you." Call 7 brought a new tactic from Agent Torres. She asked if Gavin would release some people as a show of good faith, maybe the children and elderly. Gavin refused. "Everyone stays until I get what I want. That's non-negotiable." Torres tried another approach, asking about Gavin's family, whether his parents knew what was happening. This triggered something in Gavin. His face twisted with anger, and he started shouting about how his dad had left when he was 10, how his mom was a drunk who didn't care about him, how nobody had ever cared about him except me, and now I was leaving too. He fired the gun into the air, making everyone scream and duck. "Stop trying to manipulate me. I know what you're doing. I'm not stupid." He threw the phone down hard enough to crack the screen. For the next 20 minutes, he refused to answer when Cross or Torres called back, and I could feel the tension ratcheting higher as everyone wondered if he was about to start shooting. I tried to talk to him during that window of silence. I said his name softly, carefully, like approaching a wild animal. "Gavin, please, let's talk, just you and me. Send everyone else away and we'll figure this out together." He looked at me with desperate hope. "You mean it? You'll stay if I let them go?" I nodded, lying through my teeth, saying whatever he needed to hear. "I'll stay. I'll talk to Cornell, tell them I need to defer. We'll work on us. But you have to let these people go first. They didn't do anything. This is between us." For a moment I thought it might work. His expression softened and he lowered the gun slightly. Then his phone rang again and shattered the moment. He snatched it up, screaming at Torres, "Stop calling me! I'll call you when I'm ready." But he didn't hang up this time, and Torres said something that made him pause. "Gavin, I have your mother on another line. She wants to talk to you. Would you like that?" Gavin's whole body went rigid. "My mother? She doesn't give a damn about me. This is a trick." Torres's voice stayed gentle. "It's not a trick. She's here with me. She drove down from Montpelier when she heard what was happening. She's very worried about you. Please, just talk to her for a minute." There was a click and muffled sounds. Then a woman's voice, slurred and crying. "Gavin? Baby, it's Mom. Please don't hurt anyone. Please just come out and we'll get you help." Gavin's hand holding the phone was shaking. "Help. I don't need help. I need Mackenzie. I need someone to stay with me for once in my life instead of leaving." His mother said something I couldn't hear clearly, and Gavin's face crumpled. For a second I thought he might cry, might put the gun down, might end this. Instead, he screamed, "You're drunk right now, aren't you? I can hear it in your voice. You don't care about me. You've never cared." He threw the phone again, harder this time, and it shattered completely. The loss of communication meant the situation became even more unpredictable. We had no way to coordinate with police, no way for them to know what was happening. Gavin paced furiously, muttering to himself, the gun waving erratically. At 9:03 p.m., Mr. Kowalski made his move. The old veteran had been watching Gavin's pattern, timing his pacing, and when Gavin's back was turned for just a second, Kowalski lunged. He was fast for 72, covering the distance in 3 long strides, reaching for the gun. But Gavin spun with reflexes honed by 18 months of sports in high school, and they collided. The gun went off. The bullet hit one of the explosive bags Gavin had planted. Nothing happened. No explosion, no flames, because there never were any explosives. Gavin had been bluffing about that part, and Mr. Kowalski's gamble had just revealed the truth to everyone. The mood shifted instantly. People realized the threat was only the gun, not complete annihilation. Mr. Kowalski and Gavin struggled on the ground, grappling for the weapon. My dad ran forward to help, then Aubrey's father, then 2 other men. They pulled Gavin off Kowalski and pinned him face down in the grass while my mom kicked the gun away. Gavin screamed and fought, but he was outmatched 5-1. Someone grabbed the detonator from his pocket and threw it into the bushes. Someone else retrieved one of the dropped phones and dialed 911, shouting that they needed police inside now, that the gunman was subdued. I stood frozen, unable to process that it was over, that the last 3 hours had ended in 30 seconds of chaos and courage from a 72-year-old veteran who'd decided enough was enough. Police swarmed the backyard within minutes, tactical units in heavy gear surrounding Gavin with weapons drawn. They cuffed him while he sobbed into the grass, still screaming my name, begging me not to leave him. Paramedics rushed in for Thomas Hartley, loading him onto a stretcher and racing him to a waiting ambulance. Other paramedics checked everyone else, treating scrapes and shock and one woman's sprained ankle from when she'd fallen during the initial panic. Detective Cross and Agent Torres appeared, both looking relieved and exhausted. Cross went straight to Mr. Kowalski, who was being checked for injuries, and clasped his shoulder. "That was incredibly brave and incredibly stupid, sir. But thank you." Kowalski just nodded, his hands shaking with delayed adrenaline. Torres came to me, her face kind and concerned. "Mackenzie, I'm Agent Torres. You did everything right in there. You kept him talking, kept him calm. I know that took enormous courage." The aftermath was a blur of statements and questions and shock blankets. My parents held me between them, all of us crying and unable to let go. Aubrey sat next to me, still gripping my hand like she'd been doing for hours. The yard had been transformed into a crime scene, yellow tape and evidence markers replacing party decorations. Crime scene investigators photographed everything, collected the fake explosive bags which turned out to be filled with old clothes and newspapers, bagged the gun and detonator as evidence. Detective Cross explained that they'd been preparing tactical options while Torres negotiated, that they'd had snipers positioned and breach teams ready. But hostage situations were always unpredictable and they'd been trying to wait for the safest moment. Mr. Kowalski's intervention had ended it faster than they'd hoped, but could have gone much worse. We were lucky. So incredibly lucky. Gavin was taken to the hospital first for psychiatric evaluation, then to jail. The charges were extensive: kidnapping, aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, illegal possession of a firearm, and attempted murder for shooting Thomas Hartley. The prosecutor, A severe woman named District Attorney Pauline Grayson, who had 23 years of experience, told us she'd be seeking the maximum sentence for each count. She called me 2 days after the incident to explain the legal process, to prepare me for what a trial might look like. I'd have to testify, she said. So would probably 40 other witnesses. The evidence was overwhelming, including helicopter footage from news channels that had captured the entire scene, audio recordings from Detective Cross's phone calls, and security camera footage from our neighbor's house that showed Gavin arriving and planting the fake explosives before guests showed up. Thomas Hartley survived but needed multiple surgeries to repair the damage to his femur and femoral artery. His wife, Linda Hartley, came to see me a week later to tell me they didn't blame me, that this wasn't my fault, that I'd been a victim too. But I saw the medical bills piling up, saw the wheelchair Thomas would need for months, and I felt crushing guilt despite everyone's reassurances. Mr. Kowalski became a local hero, interviewed by news stations and honored by the mayor. He shrugged it all off, saying he'd just done what needed doing. My parents struggled with guilt too, wondering if they should have seen warning signs in Gavin, if they should have done more when I broke up with him. I tried to tell them that Gavin had been good at hiding his instability, that even I hadn't known how deep it went. The trial happened 6 months later. Gavin's defense attorney, a public defender named Michael Strand, who looked tired and defeated before the trial even started, tried to argue diminished capacity due to mental illness. They brought in a psychiatrist who testified that Gavin had undiagnosed bipolar disorder with psychotic features, that he'd been experiencing a break from reality. But the prosecution countered with evidence of premeditation, the research into explosives, the purchase of the gun 3 weeks before the party, the fake bombs planted before guests arrived. DA Grayson presented phone records showing Gavin had texted his uncle asking about making explosives, had Googled how to take hostages, had searched my social media obsessively in the weeks after our breakup. The jury heard testimony from 63 witnesses who'd been at my party. They watched helicopter footage of Gavin pacing with the gun while people cowered on the ground. I testified on day 4 of the trial. DA Grayson walked me through our relationship, the breakup, the party. Gavin's lawyer cross-examined me, trying to suggest I'd led Gavin on, that I'd promised him a future and then broken those promises. Isn't it true you told Mr. Lewis you loved him? Yes, when I was 17 and thought I meant it. Isn't it true you discussed moving in together after graduation? He'd discussed it. I'd said I was going to college. Isn't it true you broke up with him via text message without giving him a chance to respond? No, I'd broken up with him in person and he'd acted like he understood. The lawyer tried to paint me as callous and Gavin as heartbroken, but the facts didn't support the narrative. When he asked if I felt any responsibility for what Gavin had done, I looked directly at the jury and said, I feel responsible for staying in that relationship as long as I did when I saw warning signs, but I'm not responsible for his choice to terrorize 60 people with a gun. The verdict came back after 9 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Gavin showed no reaction, just stared at the table while the judge read each verdict. Sentencing was set for 3 weeks later. DA Grayson told us she'd be recommending consecutive sentences, meaning Gavin would serve each penalty one after another rather than concurrently. With all the charges combined, he was looking at 45 to 60 years in prison. He was 19 years old. He'd be an old man if he ever got out. I should have felt satisfaction or relief, but mostly I felt empty. This person I'd once cared about, who I'd kissed and laughed with and thought I might love, had destroyed his own life and traumatized dozens of people because he couldn't accept that our relationship was over. Sentencing day brought victim impact statements. Thomas Hartley spoke first, describing the chronic pain he still experienced, the PTSD that made him afraid of loud noises, the medical debt that had bankrupted his family. My Aunt Eleanor spoke about her children's nightmares, about how her 6-year-old wouldn't let her out of sight anymore. Mr. Kowalski spoke about the satisfaction of stopping a threat, but also the weight of having taken that risk with other people's lives. 14 more people gave statements about anxiety, therapy, fear, broken trust. When it was my turn, I'd prepared something but ended up speaking from the heart instead. I told the court about the girl I'd been before the party, confident and excited about college, trusting and optimistic. I told them about the girl I was now, who checked locks 3 times before bed, who couldn't be in crowds without panic attacks, who'd deferred her Cornell admission for a year because she couldn't function. I told them Gavin had stolen my graduation, my celebration, my sense of safety. Then I looked at him directly and said, You said you loved me, but love doesn't hold people hostage. Love doesn't threaten to kill them. You didn't love me, Gavin. You wanted to own me, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never own anyone again. The judge, a woman named Stephanie Rayburn who'd been on the bench for 16 years, sentenced Gavin to 53 years in state prison without possibility of parole for 30 years. She called his actions calculated terrorism against innocent people, and noted that his lack of remorse during the trial demonstrated he remained a danger to society. Gavin's mother sobbed in the gallery, and I felt a flicker of sympathy for her, losing her son to his own choices. But then I remembered the 63 people whose lives he'd endangered, and my sympathy evaporated. He'd earned this sentence, every year of it. The bailiff led him away in chains, and he looked back at me one last time. No smile now, no charm. Just this empty, hollow expression like he couldn't understand how it had all gone so wrong. Therapy became my full-time job for months after the trial. I saw Dr. Nina Caldwell. Wait, that's a forbidden name. Let me use Dr. Nina Bartholomew instead, a trauma specialist with 18 years of experience treating PTSD. She helped me understand that my hypervigilance and anxiety were normal responses to an abnormal situation, that healing wasn't linear, that some days would be harder than others. We did EMDR therapy to process the traumatic memories, and slowly the flashbacks became less frequent. I joined a support group for hostage survivors and met others who understood the specific terror of being held against your will, of watching a gun pointed at people you love, of feeling utterly powerless. Their stories made me feel less alone, but also made me realize how common this kind of violence was, how many lives were shattered by intimate partner violence and obsession. I eventually made it to Cornell, starting classes 1 year late at 19 instead of 18. My roommate was understanding when I explained I couldn't watch certain movies or TV shows involving guns or hostages. My professors were accommodating when I needed extensions during particularly bad PTSD episodes. I changed my major from pre-law to psychology, wanting to understand what made people like Gavin tick, wanting to help others who'd survived trauma. I graduated 4 years later with honors and immediately applied to graduate programs in clinical psychology, specializing in trauma treatment. I wanted to become someone like Dr. Bartholomew, someone who helped piece people back together after violence shattered them. My parents sold the house where the party had happened. They couldn't bear to look at that backyard anymore, couldn't erase the memories of those 3 hours. We moved to a smaller place across town, and they used the extra money to help pay for Thomas Hartley's medical bills, even though legally they weren't responsible. It helped them sleep better at night, knowing they'd tried to make things right. Aubrey and I remained best friends, bonded even tighter by shared trauma. She went to UVM for nursing, inspired partly by watching Joyce Bellamy and Craig Solomon save Thomas's life with limited supplies under impossible conditions. She said she wanted to be useful in a crisis, wanted to have skills that could help people when everything went wrong. Mr. Kowalski and I stayed in touch. He'd check on me every few months, and I'd visit him occasionally to hear his stories about Vietnam and his life after. He told me once that tackling Gavin was the first time in 40 years he'd felt useful, felt like his military training meant something. I told him he'd saved lives that day, including mine, and he deserved every award and recognition he'd received. He shrugged and said heroes were just regular people who did what needed doing when nobody else would. His humility made him even more heroic in my eyes. 10 years after the party, I opened my own practice specializing in trauma treatment and intimate partner violence. I'd completed my PhD, done my clinical internships, and built a reputation for understanding survivors in ways that only another survivor could. My clients ranged from domestic violence victims to hostage survivors to people who'd escaped cults or abusive families. I shared parts of my story when it helped them understand they weren't alone, that someone else had been through hell and made it out. Every person I helped felt like reclaiming power from what Gavin had tried to take from me. Gavin came up for his first parole hearing after serving 30 years. I was 48 years old by then, married to a kind man I'd met in graduate school, with 2 teenage daughters who knew their mother's history but didn't let it define me. I wrote a statement opposing parole, detailing how his actions still affected me decades later, how I still had PTSD triggers, how the survivors deserved to know he'd served his full sentence. The parole board denied his release, citing the severity of his crimes and the lasting impact on victims. He'd be eligible again in 5 years. I'd be ready to oppose him again then, and every time after that until either he died in prison or I did. My daughters asked me once why I kept opposing his parole when so much time had passed. I told them that Gavin had demonstrated what he was capable of at 19, and nothing in his prison record suggested he'd fundamentally changed. I told them that holding someone accountable wasn't about revenge, it was about protecting future potential victims. I told them that some actions have permanent consequences, and terrorizing 63 people with a gun for 3 hours was one of those actions. They seemed to understand. They'd grown up knowing their mother was strong because she'd survived, but also knowing that survival came with scars that never fully healed. The backyard where it happened had been torn down by the new owners, replaced with a swimming pool and deck. I drove past it once, 5 years after moving away, and felt nothing. The space had been transformed so completely that my memories couldn't attach to the physical location anymore. The trauma lived in my body and mind, not in that particular patch of grass and trees. Healing meant carrying the weight of what happened while still building a life worth living, still finding joy and purpose and meaning despite the scars. Gavin had taken 3 hours of my life and tried to take everything after, but he'd failed. I'd gone to college, built a career, found love, raised children, helped hundreds of other survivors. His attempt to own me had backfired completely. I'd become more myself than I might have been without the trauma, more focused, more determined, more capable of surviving anything else life threw at me. How did my graduation party turn into a hostage situation in under 15 minutes? Because I dated someone who couldn't distinguish between love and possession, who thought holding a gun on people was an acceptable response to rejection. Because warning signs often look like attention and care until they escalate into control and violence. Because our culture doesn't teach young men how to handle heartbreak without becoming dangerous. The real question wasn't how it happened, but how I'd taken that nightmare and transformed it into fuel for helping others, for building something meaningful from the worst day of my life. Gavin had wanted to make me stay, to force me into the life he'd planned. Instead, he'd given me purpose, clarity, and an unshakable understanding of my own strength. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.